little replacements with Laurent in the schedule. So Laurent will come tomorrow, and he will take the spot of Ryan, who will give now a talk on how to offend 1 billion people, or that is what I'm expecting of it.
Hey, hi. So if you're hoping for RubyMotion, you're going to be a wee bit disappointed, unfortunately. What I'm going to be talking about is something I'm going to call cultured localization. It's about how you approach a localization project for what you're going to do in hopefully a rational way that doesn't offend 1 billion people, or basically anybody you're trying to reach out to. And I hope I'm going to make this clearer as I go. So a good way to start is with a story. So I'll tell you one about a wee company called eBay, who in 2004 decided they wanted to break out into a new market. And it was all fashionable at the time, so they decided to expand into China. And they moved the man who led their expansion into Europe over and told him to get on with it. So he went over, and what they essentially did was a straight port of their US eBay model store and interaction over to China. They translated bits and bobs of it around, but it was largely the same thing. It didn't go all that well for them. It's a local company, and I'm going to mangle the pronunciation, Taobao, were run by the Alibaba group, and they arrived at about, the service started up the same time eBay started going out in China. And they were a local company run by local people, so they had a good head start in terms of how Chinese people buy and sell and everything else. And their offering was quite different to eBay's in terms of how people interacted with their various marketplace websites. And they had several key differences to how things were going on that was more relevant to the Chinese. So by 2006, most of eBay's market share in China was gone to these guys. They totally ate their lunch. And, the main differences about it were eBay's design was generally seen as too foreign. It wasn't at all adapted to Chinese tastes and desires. It was laid out in exactly the same way. Things weren't easy to get at by category, so there was the buyer-seller split, and then everything under there. You couldn't just easily go in and grab women's dresses or shoes. They didn't have very many local payment options. They had a few mistranslations, which was quite embarrassing for them. But the big deal was the poor communication tools. If you've used eBay, you know you can talk to the seller. You can pick a set of predefined questions from a list and fire it over, and then get your answer back to the seller, hopefully before the auction closes. If it doesn't, you're out of luck. But the important difference was in these communication tools. There were other factors as well, but Chinese people love to haggle. So when they're doing a sale in a marketplace or whatever, they want to have a chat with the person they're buying from. They want to talk about the person they're buying from, the thing they're going to buy, agree a price, and Taobao had this live chat built in so they could talk to the seller and just sort everything out between them. eBay didn't do this. They were worried that the sale would be settled out of band and they would lose their cut and wouldn't make any money on the auction. And it just wasn't how the market operated there. So in the end, eBay still are fairly big in China. They moved over to Hong Kong, they've started again, and they're doing not too badly there now. The lessons they learned have been applied to their newer version of eBay in China, and it's going quite well. The reason why they failed there in terms of keeping customers going is the local company had a head start, and eBay didn't do the upfront research. They didn't have the right people on board to explain cultural differences to them. They just stuck to it worked here, so it'll work there mentality, and they just shipped it and forgot about it. They thought it was just largely going to be a translation problem, and they swapped the text strings around, and that was it. And at the end of the day, the potential billion people strong market went to someone else. So they'd not quite pissed them off, they just couldn't speak to them in the way it was expected. So to give it a bit more of a positive spin, instead, what I'm going to talk about is how you can win with 1 billion people, or just anybody who's from a different background to you, the things that you could keep in mind that you might not necessarily think about. And it's not particularly about any tools or services, and it's not necessarily web-specific either. It's any time you want to communicate with another person. Like, most of us will do it over the web, because that's what we do. But at the end of the day, it's all about communication regardless of the medium. So this is what I'm going to be talking about. But first, so a wee bit of audience participation, because that's always good fun. There's 2 coloured boxes on the wall behind me, hopefully. Yes, there is. All right. A green one and a red one. When you look at those 2 squares, you probably have different thoughts about what the colour and the association means to you. So for the green one, what do you think? Shout something out. Yep. Passing test, success, and go. And the red one, what do you think? Yep. So here we see that the green one has a very clear positive association. It's sometimes passing tests, sometimes means good, bad, stop, go, can mean money, depending on where you're from. The red one generally always means a bad thing. It's something to be wary of. It's a failing test. It means you can't go. Something's dangerous. And we all largely agree on that because we're broadly from the same cultural background here. We're all from over here. But if you were in the Far East, this example is a bit contrived because it's not quite as cut and dry in this. But the meanings are actually almost inverse. So green, rather than being a happy-go-lucky colour, can be associated with misfortune, death, and sadness. And red's a colour of wealth and luck and prosperity and good things. And you wouldn't necessarily make that association if you didn't know. And it's an assumption that we automatically make because of how we're brought up in our cultures that we don't think about making. And it's just to illustrate that these basic assumptions we make can sometimes be wrong. But I have to talk about localization, since that's what's in the title. So I'm going to share a series of examples with you. And I apologise for the blurriness of the examples. I took them with my phone camera when I was down in London. And there's a lovely park called St James's Park. It's quite near the palace and everything else. It's lovely down there. And I was speaking with the Met Police to see if I could get the original documents for them, but they were quite busy with the Olympics, so they didn't answer my emails. It's a bit understandable. So this sign is blurry, but it's warning people visiting the park about bogus police officers, folk in plain clothes telling tourists that they're policemen, and they're trying to shake them down for money. It's like, yes, you've dropped litter, that's £100 fine. And all of these things. And yeah, if you're not from London or nearby, you don't know that that's a shakedown. It might be the case where you're from that littering's a severe crime, so you'll hand the money over. But because people from all over the world come to London, they've put it up in hopefully Chinese. I can't read Chinese, so I don't know if it is the same sign. And again, slow replies. So they translated it. It's all a nice official sign. The Japanese one was interesting. It's very, very blurry. Had shaky hands and everything. It's not just translated, it's been localized. So it's conveying the same information, but in a way that's a bit more relevant. It's clearly showing alarm and distress and danger and all these things that are negative. There's like scary men after you. And that is what I mean by cultured localization. It's going the extra step to not just make your content correct, but relevant. So that's communicating with people how they expect to be communicated with. And it comes down to the human touch. So the best person to understand Chinese culture is probably a Chinese person, and Japanese person, culture, Japanese person, and so on. So these all worked because there's real people involved in the process, and they've had the foreplanning to know that we need to get someone in to help us with this, to make sure it's correct and right. And they did the translating, they did the localization, they designed the content, and they were able to maintain the context of the meaning, the clear message that was trying to be conveyed. And you lose that with machine translation. So there's a fun website called translationparity.com. It uses the Google Translate API. You give it a phrase in English, and it keeps translating it using Google Translate from Japanese to English and back again until it gets the same thing out that it put in, often with humorous results. So this is the start of it. You like to wear red socks. And at the end of it, You get the same thing in as out. It goes through all various phrases, doesn't come out with the same meaning. That's because the meaning is lost, because you're just translating dumb text over and over. The machine doesn't understand. So the human touch is best. And I'm racing on here, sorry. Hey, the machines themselves have a place for simple translation. You wouldn't trust Google Translate to make sense of an entire paragraph. So if you're on a website that's got a Google Translate button for you, you know that what you get out of that is just going to be nonsense. It's lovely that it's there, and it's good that people are thinking that maybe people from not where I'm from will be visiting here, but it's almost next to useless, especially for tricky languages that don't translate cleanly across from one to the other, where there's more mapping between ideas rather than expressions and all these other fun things. So what can you do about it? Well, there's a bunch of tools, a whole bunch of tools available to us as web developers that go after the translation problem. So it seems to be viewed as the most important part, in that your product or service needs to be sold in Germany and Japan and Brazil, so it should speak German or Portuguese or Japanese. And that's fine, because you do still need to speak to people in their language, but it's only a tiny part of the overall localization problem. Bounce. So we've got a locale app, which is from London. I think it came out of the London Ruby user group. And it's this great collaborative thing where you put your locales up, you stick in your strings, and then somebody either on your team or somebody from elsewhere goes in and translates it for you. And you just get in German this English text over and over and over again. And it generates the Rails locale files that you can then drop straight into your app again, which is useful for what it does. And it's a lovely app. There's more expensive services like Gingo that do per word translation for any text you give it, and they've got almost every language covered with what they do. They've got different levels of service you can pay for, from a straightforward, somebody from Japan will translate what you've said into Japanese, all the way to expert translation. So you can pay a bit more per word and get somebody who's approximately an expert in the same domain as you to hopefully convey the context as well as the translation when they're pulling it through, so the translations are much more accurate. And it's a bit more expensive because of that. They also have an API that you can integrate with pretty much any CMS you've got, so you can click a button and fire it off, get a bill, and get the translated text straight into your website's back end, which is pretty good too. They've got something like locale where they can give you a bunch of strings that you can swap out, but that's great. Only dealing with the translation though. And as we've seen with the colors, there's a bit more to communication than just saying the right words. The other service is quite new. I've not had a chance to play with this yet. It's Phrase, but my understanding is the app integrates with your app's a gem you pull down, and your content editors log in and they edit the content in place, so it keeps the context clear from what's going through, and it integrates better with your application. So it involves keeping the context present to increase the accuracy of the translation effort. And because it's a human doing the translation, they're seeing the whole thing, the quality is generally better, and that's their idea. But what you're trying to say is really only one part of it. You've got to say the why you're saying something. So what's this text for? And the purpose for most of us, I guess, is to sell something, whether it's an idea or a product or advertising space. You know, it's something you're wanting people to give you something in exchange for your content. And how you buy and sell things across cultures is quite different, especially when you think about all the different people you've got in the world. You're trying to reach them all. It's an almost impossible goal to cover everyone and get everything right. There's also the how, which is related, but my notes have all gone. It comes down to this question at the end of the day. An alien appears out of nowhere. He's nice and friendly looking, and you want to answer this question. So the alien drops out of nowhere. How do you say please to him? Someone from a culture so alien to you that it doesn't seem to have a concept of politeness. What do you think? Shout out an answer. Doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. Give it a go. Smiling? Oh, I won't leave you hanging there. The question's a bit of a trap. Hey. It's a cultural thing. Hey, politeness is a protocol. It's an agreed way of behaving between two people in the same culture. So what's polite to me and my friends, we understand because we're from the same place and background, and it's broadly the same throughout Europe. We know please and thank you, and we've got local equivalents in languages for what we're trying to say, but the giving and receiving of things is often different. There's rules around how you present gifts to people in various places and all that, and those are all protocols within that culture that you would need to understand. And since selling something is essentially, please give me money, it's important that you understand at least that part of the protocol that people are trying to reach. And it's not to say, sorry, I'm ragging a bit on just dumbly translating things and presenting it, and it's not to say that's the only way to go, that way is wrong. It will certainly work, and you'll get some return on your investment in terms of the translation. You'll get sales from people who speak that language, and that's fine. This is more to do with the overall concept of creating something to target your market rather than going after the quick buck with this is in Chinese people will buy it now. This is for Chinese people because these are who I'm trying to reach. So this should be relevant to them, and then they'll send more money with me. It's a bit of a mercenary way to put it. So politeness is a protocol. And it's about what buy you sell, what seems normal and abnormal. It's stuff that you do without thinking. And that gives you the how. So the way you say something, the way you ask, say, your boss for something, if you're not particularly friendly with them, is different to how you'd ask your friend for something. That's a protocol that you understand. So it's that sort of thing. So how does that all relate? Well, the immediate assumption, as I've belabored at this point, is that localization is a translation problem. And hopefully so far I've tried to make it clear that it's not just the words that you're using, there's also the phrase and tone of your content, the direction of it, even the design of the media you're using to present things to people changes depending on the varying culture, depending on how you want to reach out to them and how you want to do a better job of communicating with them. So language good only applied on its own. So the one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at design is things that you might not normally come across. If you're translating a website from English to German, some German words are very, very, very long compared to their English equivalents. Well, your website layout quote with really long strings that won't break, for example. There's things that your design team might need to be made aware of if they're not, and they're working on things for you. Do you even need to use the same layout? Does it make sense? Not all languages flow in the same direction. Will your website's layout work right to left as it does left to right? Is the colors correct? Are you given an implicit death threat with your content just by the color you've got? You wouldn't know. And then you fire it up, and then suddenly nobody goes there. It's important that the imagery and the content and the organization works through. And I'm not going to go too much further into this, and I've raced ahead. So I'm just going to go into the other side, which I hope will help make my point. These are examples from incorrect localization from the other point of view around, and they're from a fairly famous site on the internet. They're mistranslations for people. They're signs that you read if you're an English speaker and are funny because they're mistranslated. And so it's bad localization, it's bad translation, it's correct, you know what it means, but at the same time you know it's not right, and it looks ridiculous. I've picked ridiculous examples on purpose, but it's certainly amusing. But if you get it wrong, it can offend. There's colloquialisms that translate across, and you might know that, I don't know, the F word's a good way of saying emphatic things in English. So if you're translating something, you want to make it seem really, really important. You go, this is fucking great, when really you want to mean it's good. And depending on the audience you're going for, it's probably not going to be all that good an idea. There are more extreme examples of this, but I'm definitely not going to do it in front of a mixed audience. So my point that I was trying to make is don't just approach localization as translation. Approach it as a people problem, a communication problem. At the end of the day, you're trying to reach out to a person and form a connection, whether it's through print, through the web, or a sign in a park, or even just the colour of a billboard you're designing for someone else. It's important to keep these things in mind. The colour, the tone, the culture of the people you're trying to reach. You don't necessarily need to go out and become an expert on where you're going. It could just be a case of hiring a consultant or someone from that background who can assist you in what you're doing. It's going to cost a lot more, but it'll work a lot better. I've totally sped through this, but is there any questions at all? Yeah?
Are you aware of any reference websites that deal with cultural differences, not just the language differences, but the cultural differences? You gave the example of the difference between green and red when it comes to the Chinese, but are you aware of any reference websites that deal with those issues?
Not explicitly, no, but just a good free resource, and cop out to say this, is Wikipedia. They've got massive cultural encyclopedia articles about everybody, where there are some entries that are quite useful there. Some Googling will probably help you out there. The best thing to ask is to always ask a real person. Information on the internet may not be right, but yeah, it's a good starting point. Certainly Wikipedia for that. Yeah.
You said that Gengo have people in the same sort of domains look at websites to translate, or look at text to translate them. Do they not offer the service to look at the site and try and pick up them? Surely something from those cultures looking at it would instantly see that.
Certainly would, and that's why you should probably engage with one. I don't know if Gengo do that. They didn't when I looked. They might do now. They've changed their offering a lot, though. When I went to grab the screenshot there, the website was an entirely different colour and laid out from the last time I was there as well. So it's, information might be slightly out of date, but certainly the API is still there and the translation services are still there. Yep.
What was the site that you showed that compared to translations that started with the Red Sox?
Oh, by translationparty.com. Translationparty.com.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Vincent?
I think a website that does that, I'm not sure to what extent and how successful, but I think Amazon does a lot of, like the German Amazon site often look different from the US.
Yeah, and the Japanese one's very different as well. It's quite a very good example if it done well, yeah. Anybody else? Well, thanks a lot, guys. My details are all up there. Thanks for listening to me, and thank you, Ghent. It's been lovely.